Nearly 100 years ago, this man founded a political party. Over the past century, it's flirted with socialism, fascism, and social democracy, and it's still around today. But the party hasn't won an election in nearly 45 years, and it hasn't won outright in over 70. So what does this party believe in? And can it ever win an election again? This is the story of Turkey's Republican People's Party, better known by its initials, CHP. For the first 27 years of the country's existence, Turkey was governed by one party under one ideology called Kemalism. It was named after its founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. It was made up of 6 principles, and until recently, most Turkish schoolchildren were taught to memorize them all off by heart.
Laiklik, cumhuriyetçilik, halkçılık, laiklik.
Some can still recite them. Few can say what they actually mean. So, 6 principles represented by 6 arrows, at least after 1931. Before 1931, there were only 4 principles, but we don't have time to get into that right now. All you really need to know is that this was the symbol of an increasingly authoritarian, single-party state. Yes, to the extent that Turkish athletes at the Berlin Olympics in 1936 wore uniforms carrying the Olympic logo, the Turkish Star and Crescent, and the 6 arrows of the CHP. There was another political party that paraded its logo around that year. The CHP never went the way of Nazism. Atatürk's pitch had always been that he wanted the country to become a multi-party democracy eventually. But by the time İsmet İnönü became the party's second leader a few years later, Turkey had other things on its mind. It had a Second World War to avoid. And it did. Turkey joined the Allied side in early 1945. It saw out the war without firing a single shot, and it joined the United Nations as the world looked out to a new dawn. But things couldn't return to the way that they were. In the West, it had become somewhat unfashionable to work with countries that operated as single-party states, and within Turkey, there were growing calls for the CHP to finally allow other parties to compete in elections. So, in 1946, İnönü called a snap election, which the CHP won. But it was such a transparent process.
Seçim gününde sandıkları dolaştım ben 46'da. Orada çok yerde, çünkü kanun hükmü icabı açıktı. Tasnif gizli. Jandarma silahıyla orada baskı yapıyor. Kime veriyorsun? Teyyare hırsızı Bayram Rey'e vereceksin. Milli mücadele kahramanı Atatürk'ün yakın arkadaşı İnönü'ye vereceksin. Rey verenlere karşı söylenen söz buydu. Ve o devrede biraz ne karışıyorsun ben istediğimi verim diyenlere ve diğerlerine cesaret verici harekette bulunanlara karşı ağır muamele yapılıyor. Al jandarma bunu götür karakola deyip karakola götürülenler de vardı.
So voters had to mark their ballot papers in clear view, in front of everyone. The actual counting of those ballot papers happened in private. And would you believe the CHP won 85% of the seats in Parliament? It's a surprise that the opposition won anything at all. Fast forward 4 years to 1950, and things were quite different. Voting was by secret ballot, the counting was in public, the Democrats were better organised, and they had a clear policy platform that voters found attractive. So Turkey's first free election was a Democrat landslide, and we'll cover that in a separate story. For the CHP, this ended the last time they would govern alone. That was 70 years ago. So then why is it that the CHP still exists as a party today? What relevance does it still have? Well, part of the answer is that the party is rather good at reinventing itself. It's done it, very slowly, but it has done it, and more than once. Take that single-party era, for example, when the CHP didn't really have a grand ideological position. Was it a left-wing party or a right-wing one? I mean, sure, CHP stood for Republican People's Party, and the word people suggested it might be on the left, but maybe not. It wasn't until the 1960s, after Turkey's first military coup ended the Democrat Party's time in power, that the CHP began to seriously think about ideology. İnönü was still the leader, but he was by now an old man, and he let a plucky young deputy reposition the party.
Anlaşılıyor. it seems that the army attempt which has taken place.
Under Bülent Ecevit's direction, İnönü declared in 1965 that the CHP was a party to the left of centre, ortanın solu, to use the Turkish lingo. It angered many people. Communists and Marxists said the party couldn't be considered left-wing in the slightest anymore, while the CHP's centre-right rival said it made the party look too left-wing. Süleyman Demirel came up with a pithy phrase, left of centre is Moscow's path. It sounds better in Turkish because it rhymes. Ortanın solu, Moskova'nın yolu. And it didn't immediately work. The CHP lost the 1965 election. Yet Ecevit was onto something. He correctly identified that a majority of Turkish voters were conservative and right-wing of various shades, but that there were many sympathetic to social democracy and they could be persuaded to lend their vote. Ecevit's estimate was that a left-wing party could take around 40% of the vote and find a path to power. And that plan was successful. There were two elections in the 1970s and the CHP won them both as a party that could court both the left and the centre. The second of those elections saw the party take 41% of the vote, a record for the party. But parliamentary mathematics got in the way. The CHP couldn't muster a majority and could only survive in government with the support of smaller parties of very different ideologies. Some in the party believed that the next election, likely to happen around 1981, would be the one when the CHP would win enough seats to govern alone. It never happened because the military got there first. It seized power again in 1980. General Kenan Evren arrested senior politicians, dissolved parliament and shut down all political parties, including the CHP, Atatürk's own party. Evren said he was cleansing the system, dispensing with those tired old politicians who couldn't produce solutions. He was, he said, unleashing a new, youthful generation. So he banned all the main leaders, including Ecevit and Demirel, and only allowed new parties that were led by friends of the military. He claimed that he was being politically neutral. It's true that all political ideologues were persecuted under Evren's regime, but there's a very strong case to be made that the left wing, particularly socialists and Marxists and those who weren't centre-ground moderates, was the hardest hit. So, in the 1980s and 1990s, the Turkish left became bitterly divided, not really over what they believed in, but who should be leading them. Do you remember İnönü? His son came back to launch a new party. Remember Ecevit? He formed a separate party. Remember this guy? Probably not, but he was a junior minister in the 1970s and he helped re-establish the CHP. All three parties competed against each other in elections. In 1994's local elections, the left lost control of the capital Ankara and the biggest city Istanbul, whereas if all three had put aside the personality contest and actually agreed a joint candidate, they would easily have won. And the man who snuck past the left to win Istanbul and establish himself as a major household name?
3.37.
So Kenan Evren's coup turned the Turkish left wing into a personality contest that split the vote and generally didn't win elections. There were mergers and implosions and sex scandals, but it wasn't really until 2010 that the CHP returned to Ecevit's old formula and try to appeal to voters outside of its traditional base. That traditional base is a group of people that you could probably describe loosely, perhaps a bit clumsily, as secularists, people who support Atatürk's party because they believe ardently in the system Atatürk created. But you can't win an election with those people alone. So has the strategy succeeded? Well, clearly not yet, and although it's difficult to gauge these things perfectly, there have been national votes where CHP candidates have broken the 30% barrier, although there's still some way to go before they reach that 40% figure Ecevit identified in the 1960s. So it seems the way for the CHP to win power again is for the right wing to be divided and for the CHP to work with other parties that believe in some different things. The 2020s could be the decade when Atatürk's party makes a return. In the next episode, him, that, these, them, her.